For the remainder of the term, we will focus on how ritual can sometimes strengthen and yet sometimes undermine different social groups within a society. Our first topic under this umbrella will be ritual and hierarchy, and then our final topic of the course will be ritual and politics. People often talk about how rituals bring people together, but just because people are together participating in a ritual does not mean that they are participating as equals or in ways that affirm equality. It's true that ritual has the potential to strengthen community bonds by obliging people to cooperate, share, and show goodwill, but ritual's social dimensions are not always so happy. Ritual can just as easily fortify social hierarchies and deepen divisions. To figure out what is going on in any specific ritual, we have to inspect closely the details of symbolism and action. In this unit, we'll look closely at two examples, fox hunting in England and second line parades in New Orleans. There are some common ways of reinforcing or subverting hierarchy in ritual cross-culturally, and we can see these clearly in side-by-side comparisons. For example, the principle of sameness, or the absence of hierarchy, can be seen in forming a circle with no one person in an honorific spot, whereas hierarchy can be seen in some people occupying honorific positions, often in a head position or elevated above others, or on a high seat or atop an animal. Another contrast can be found in ritual use of food. Sameness can be seen in people drinking or eating from the same vessel, as seen in a Fijian kava ceremony at the top, or when Senegalese host guests at the bottom. This can be compared with rituals in which a few individuals drink or eat from special vessels not available to everyone, or special foods not available to everyone. Examples are how, in the pre-Columbian period, only the Maya nobility could consume chocolate, and they did so in special ritual vessels in the top two photos. And then the Baba Sheikh of the Yazidi hierarchy, who eats all of his meals ritually and seated apart from everyone else. Ritual sameness can be seen in cases in which everyone performs the same actions or has equal access to the same roles. This can be compared with people performing structurally different actions or not having equal access to the same roles. For example, during the late Middle Ages in England and France, only knights, who were therefore members of the aristocracy, participated in the joust before the king. And in more recent times, in England, only young ladies of the aristocracy and upper classes would be presented to the royalty and welcomed into high society in debutante balls, marking the beginning of the social season. Another example is how Catholic festivals for the saints have been organized in many indigenous communities in Middle America. The festivals are organized and in part financed by wealthier men who, as a consequence of this religious service, rise in the religious and political hierarchies in the community. The principle of sameness can be seen in the ritual exchange of gifts of equal value, such as was the case in the Kula ring described by Bronislaw Malinowski, in which participants from different islands in the Trobriand Islands exchanged red shell necklaces for white shell armbands. This compares with ritually bestowing very valuable gifts that the recipients cannot return, such as was seen in the potlatch ceremonies of the northwest coast of North America in the previous century. This type of competitive feasting creates obligation and deference. Ritual sameness can be seen in imagery of circles, such as dancing around the maypole. This stands in contrast to imagery of pyramids or ladders, as exemplified by Masonic rituals. The principle of sameness is seen when everyone wears similar clothing, as in this candomblé ceremony in Brazil. In contrast, hierarchy is reinforced by costumes and regalia that symbolize differential status, such as in the ceremony featuring the king of the Cuba Kingdom. To explore how ritual can either bolster or weekend hierarchies in society, we'll consider two examples in depth. First, please read James Howe's article on fox hunting as ritual. Howe analyzes fox hunting in England, but it is worth noting that fox hunting is still practiced in parts of New England and the Mid-Atlantic states here in the U.S., although not in the same way. Toward the beginning of the article, Howe spends a good deal of time critiquing an article written by Edmund Leach. Try not to get bogged down in the details of that argument. For our purposes, the most important parts of Howe's article are page 278 and then page 281 onward. Howe describes fox hunting in England on page 278 as a, quote, ritual of social class, one dramatizing themes and images about the gentry and aristocracy, end quote. As you are reading, pay close attention to the details that he offers in support of that conclusion. He looks at various elements such as fox hunting vocabulary, equipment, the horses and hounds, the time involved, the different roles in the hunt, access to land, and animal symbolism. Then you will read Second Lines, Minstrelsy, and the Contested Landscapes of New Orleans Afro-Creole Festivals by Helen A. Regis. She describes what are known as second line parades in New Orleans, which are street festivals led by brass bands that move their way through, quote, back-of-town neighborhoods on a weekly basis. She focuses on what she calls community-based second lines, which have a long tradition in working-class New Orleanian neighborhoods, and she contrasts these with the staged or commodified second-line parades that have in recent years been created for tourists. She argues that community-based second-line parades, quote, create an alternative social order by the way they move through urban neighborhoods. She notes important details such as where they move, how they are formed, who joins in, and what happens in them. She also asserts that there are two landscapes in New Orleans neighborhoods. One, the quotidian or everyday landscape, how certain areas are experienced on a day-to-day basis, and two, the ritual landscape, which is how the same space comes to feel experientially as a consequence of ritual activity. She is suggesting that the second line parades create that ritual landscape which challenges the everyday experience of social hierarchies in the city and introduces an alternative social order. What I'd like you to think about is whether or not the second line parades do in fact seem to create an alternative social order that challenges the hierarchies of everyday life in New Orleans. In other words, do the second line parades bolster or weaken existing social hierarchies in the city? Do they introduce alternative, more equal forms of social relationships and social life in the city that have a long-lasting impact? In this unit, you might also think about whether it is more likely that ritual reinforces social hierarchies or challenges them. We don't have enough evidence in this unit to draw definitive conclusions, but now that you have become familiar with so many rituals worldwide, you might develop an insightful hypothesis.